Is it precisely France that could become the greatest threat to the survival of the common currency in Europe? At first glance, this may seem surprising. After all, France is the second largest economy in the eurozone, a country with developed industry, modern agriculture, and strong infrastructure. It is also one of the pillars of the European Union, both politically and economically. But beneath the surface of the elegant facade of the French economy, pressure is mounting that could have consequences for the entire eurozone. At the very heart of this problem lies public debt. In 2024, French debt reached a level of over 112% of gross domestic product. For comparison, in Germany, it is only 66%, in the Netherlands 50%, and in Spain, despite serious crises in recent years, around 109%. France, therefore, is approaching the level of Italy, where debt already reaches 137% of GDP. The problem, however, lies not only in how high this debt is, but also in how quickly it is growing. Over the past 20 years, France has almost never balanced its budget. Even in years of economic growth, the budget deficit remained above 3%, and every subsequent crisis, from the global financial crisis through the pandemic to the inflationary shock related to the war in Ukraine, added further tens of billions of euros to the state's debt. At the same time, France's economic growth rate is disappointing. Between 2010 and 2024, the average annual growth was around 1.1%. For comparison, Germany, 1.4%, Spain, 1.3%, and the eurozone average, 1.2%. This means that France is growing too slowly to catch up with its debt. And this is a worrying signal because without solid economic growth, public debt becomes increasingly difficult to service. And here arises another problem: the costs of servicing the debt. For many years, France could borrow money almost for free. But with rising interest rates, the situation has changed dramatically. In 2024, debt servicing consumed over 60 billion euros, more than the entire budget for French higher education and science combined. And this is just the beginning. Over the next 5 years, the state will have to refinance bonds worth over 500 billion euros, and at higher rates. Economists say it outright. If interest rates remain elevated for a long time, France will enter a debt spiral. And this could mean the necessity of drastic cuts, or immense pressure on the European Central Bank to start buying French debt again. But France's problem is not just numbers. It is also deeply rooted structural weaknesses. France is one of the most overregulated countries in Europe. According to World Bank indicators on the ease of doing business, France consistently ranks behind countries like Germany, Ireland, the Czech Republic, or even Poland. The number of administrative procedures, high labor costs, and an extensive labor code, all of this makes entrepreneurs avoid investments or move their operations abroad. The tax system doesn't help either. Total tax burdens in France reach over 47% of GDP, one of the highest levels in the OECD. For comparison, Germany around 41%, Spain 38%, Ireland 32%. High taxes limit consumption, investment, and innovation. We know that France is grappling with rising public debt, weak economic growth, high debt servicing costs, and excessive regulation and taxation. But what does all this mean for the future of the common currency? France, as a co-founder of the eurozone, cannot declare insolvency in the way that countries with their own currencies once did. It also cannot print money to pay off its obligations. This means that, in the face of a potential debt crisis, the only option is external help from the European Central Bank or EU institutions. And here arises the question: is the ECB, which has already been buying bonds from southern countries for many years, ready to launch massive support for France again? Because if not, The consequences could be dramatic. Rising bond yields, loss of investor confidence, pressure on the banking system, and destabilization of the entire eurozone. We must not forget that France, unlike Greece or Portugal, is too big to be saved by conventional methods. We are talking about an economy worth 3 trillion euros. If this economy starts to waver, it cannot be propped up with a few tens of billions from a rescue fund. That is why experts call France too big to fail, too big to save. But that's not all. France can not only fall into a crisis, it can also export this crisis to the entire eurozone, forcing political decisions that will conflict with the interests of other member states. In practice, this means that Paris could use its position to exert pressure on the ECB, Berlin, or Brussels. This is not just a hypothesis. Already French politicians, both those in power and the opposition, are increasingly questioning the hard fiscal line pushed by Germany. President Emmanuel Macron, despite declarations of reforms, has been unable to reduce the deficit, mainly due to social protests. From the Yellow Vests movement to opposition against pension reform, every attempt to curb spending ends in street demonstrations and political deadlock. This shows that France not only lacks fiscal space, but also, perhaps, lacks the political strength to regain it. Society is increasingly polarized, and anti-system parties, both far right and far left, are gaining more support. If parliamentary elections bring victory to populists, Paris could deliberately escalate tensions with Brussels to obtain a loosening of Stability Pact rules. In this sense, France is becoming a potential fiscal blackmailer of Europe. On one hand, too important to be allowed to fail; on the other, too unstable to be a model of budgetary discipline. And the eurozone, based on common rules, will not survive long if member states start treating these rules selectively. Moreover, there is also the risk of a domino effect. If France receives special treatment, for example, through extraordinary ECB intervention or suspension of fiscal rules, other countries like Italy or Spain could demand the same. Then the entire system based on trust and shared responsibility could collapse. From the perspective of financial markets, this means an increase in the risk of the eurozone's fragmentation. Investors may start differentiating member states not only based on debt levels, but also on their political credibility. And this leads to so-called financial fragmentation, a situation where the common currency exists only in theory, while economic realities are completely divergent. Some economists even suggest that France could be the first major country to, not formally exiting the eurozone, begin questioning its foundations. It might try to renegotiate the ECB's mandates, demand common European debt, or create special financing conditions for systemically important countries. In practice, this would be a return to national interests under a common banner, something that would resemble a currency confederation more than a monetary union. Of course, this scenario does not have to come true. France could carry out reforms, stabilize public finances, and regain economic growth. But for that to happen, a rare combination in politics is needed: courage, consistency, and societal consent for tough decisions. For now, there is no indication that this condition is being met. Therefore, the question of whether France will blow up the eurozone is no longer abstract. It is a real risk that every investor, every politician, and every citizen of the European Union should take into account.